Matt Walsh is the host of Daily Wire's Matt Walsh Show. He is an author, he is a documentary maker, and you might not know this, but he is also a DEI anti-racist expert, and he is going to tell us today how we can escape the oppression of whiteness and systemic racism in this country through what he learned in his new documentary, Am I Racist? This episode is brought to you by our friends at Good Ranchers. Go to goodranchers.com. Use code Allie at checkout. That's goodranchers.com, code Allie. Matt, thanks so much for taking the time to join us. So you went on quite a journey, hair journey, anti-racist journey. There were a lot of journeys happening at once in this documentary. And as a white woman myself, I learned a lot about race and racism that I didn't know. So I was wondering if you could help us, or maybe primarily white audience, I think, understand a little bit. I guess the first basic question is like, what is racism and how do we diagnose ourselves with it?
Well, I mean, the first thing you have to understand is that there's no solid definition for racism, because if there's a solid definition for it, then that means it's possible to not be it. Because you could look at the definition and say, well, that's not me, I'm not that. But the most important thing that I learned on my journey of self-discovery, is that as a white man myself, I'm racist no matter what. There's no way to escape it. And so I guess the definition of racism is whatever you happen, as a white person, whatever you happen to be thinking or feeling at this very moment in time, that is what racism is. And if you think or feel something totally different in the next moment, then that is also racism. Because keep something in mind, and Robin DiAngelo, the great Robin DiAngelo,
Yes.
said this to me in the film, that there's no way to be not racist. Racism is on a spectrum. You know,
Yeah.
we love the spectrums, folks. And so you could be less racist, you could be more racist in any given moment, but you can never be not racist. And the first step in being not racist is to realize that you can never be not racist.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Well, I remember you presented her with, like, I don't know, maybe you could call it the hallway quandary or the hallway problem as you were speaking to the great Robin DiAngelo. And you said, okay, if a black person says that smiling at them is racist one day, but the next day says that you didn't smile enough, both of those could be considered equally racist. And we really have no defense to that, right? Am I understanding that right? Like that we simply have to take
Exactly.
on those accusations and say, yes, it doesn't matter what my intent was. That was racist that I didn't smile at you, but also that I did smile at you. Is that right?
Exactly. And intent is very important. You have to understand that intent doesn't matter at all. It doesn't matter at all what you meant when you did something, because you might see a lot of people, you go into this journey and you're confused. You think that whenever you do or say something, like the main thing that matters is what you meant and intended when you did and said it. But a big part of the journey is to realize that it's not the case. Like, it does not matter what you meant, what you intended, your own motivations don't matter. It is entirely up to the person who is perceiving it, the person on the outside. If it's a non-white person, they get to decide. However they felt about it is what you intended, whether you intended it or not. So it's a little bit confusing, but that's the thing, and that's why something seemingly as simple as your facial expressions when you're around a person of color, that it's fraught. You never know, and it could be racist to smile at a person of color. When I first heard that, I thought to myself, great, I'm safe because I smile like 2 times a year, and I'll save those. I won't use those on a person of color. But then I come to find out that not smiling is also racist, but how do you know which one? Well, you don't. It's the person of color who is perceiving it, who's witnessing it.
Right.
They're the ones who decide, and they'll let you know whether it was racist or not. And when they let you know, all you can say is, okay, thank you for telling me.
Mm-hmm. I'm also gathering that it is simultaneously racism is inescapable for people of less melanin like you and me. It's totally inescapable. We are born into it. It is basically an innate part of our system and therefore character. But at the same time, you can maybe pay your way out of it because you can pay, $30,000 or $50,000 to one of these people to basically kind of like be your Sherpa out of the racial construct and like out of racism. So I guess I'm confused. Like, is it possible for me to take certain steps to do the work and pay the money to not be racist? Or am I just always going to be racist? And why should I pay Robin DiAngelo in the first place? I'm trying to square that.
Well, that's something you're trying to square. You're doing something called rational thought. Okay, you're trying to apply rational thought. You're trying to understand, and these are both rational thought and understanding are hallmarks of white supremacy. And so what I'm picking up from you is your own white supremacy speaking. So right. I'm getting a lot of racism even from what you're saying right now. Because you're hearing something, you're saying, well, I want to understand that. The demand that you're making for something to make sense that's white supremacy. You're saying, as a white person, this thing has to make sense to me.
Wow.
And so frankly, how dare you? But to answer the question, you can't pay your way out of racism, but you should still pay. So pay and consult these people, pay them what they ask. Obviously, don't question whatever they ask. Pay it. It's what they need. Do the work. Do all the work that they say.
Yeah.
And when you're at the end of that process, you'll discover that you're still not racist. You're probably not even less racist. But you're paying and you're doing the work. And there's some value in that. You just have to. You have to take that on faith. Is all I can say.
Yeah. So not only am I getting nothing in exchange, I'm actually kind of still getting punished for doing the work that I'm being asked to do and paying the money that is being demanded. Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Let me take a quick pause from that conversation to tell you about our first sponsor, and that is We Heart Nutrition. This is a family-owned company. I love this family. They are Christians. They are the real deal, and they started this company because they just really care about the ingredients that are in women's supplements. Kristen started this company because of her own health needs, and as a mom, she wanted to make sure that the prenatal, postnatal vitamins that she was taking were actually doing what they said they were going to do. So all of their supplements are made with the most bioavailable ingredients. That means your body is actually going to absorb them. That's why my iron levels for the first time in so many years are actually optimal. I always deal with anemia. I'm always told no matter what iron supplement I'm on that I need more iron. But for the first time in forever, I got my iron levels tested and they were optimal. And I've got to credit that to We Heart Nutrition. I love their supplements. I take their omega-3s, their postnatal vitamin, of course, their iron, their magnesium. I think it's made a really big difference in my health. If you go to weheartnutrition.com, you can take a 20-second quiz. They'll customize a vitamin regimen for you. Go to weheartnutrition.com. Use code Allie for 20% off your order. weheartnutrition.com, code Allie. There's another quandary here, and I'm trying not to, you mentioned rational thought being bad, and I'm trying not to critically think too hard about this. I think that seems to be an important aspect of this, is just kind of suspend all thinking. But you do pose a question in this documentary that I still haven't been able to figure out, and that is the Moana problem. I'm a mom of daughters too, and as you pose to this anti-racist expert, is it cultural appropriation or appreciation when we allow our daughters to watch something like Lilo and Stitch or Moana? So here's SOT 1 for everyone.
My daughter's 4 years old. I am an anti-racist educator, quote unquote. She's still watching Disney movies and she is choosing a white princess over princesses of color.
Have you talked to her about that?
all the time.
My 3-year-old daughter is her favorite princess is Moana.
Love it.
It's a good sign.
Yeah.
But then I also thought, there's a little bit of cultural appropriation here. She wants to be Moana for Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we navigate that? Do I go and buy the Pacific Islander native attire for my white 3-year-old?
I wouldn't. I wouldn't.
But I guess what we might call the Moana problem here is what, on one hand, there's cultural appropriation. On the other hand, there's gravitating towards white characters.
Right.
So it's almost like no matter which way you go, you
Right.
end up back in racism.
We think every space belongs to us because we live in a white supremacist society.
There's just so much to unpack there. And the wisdom, obviously, her wisdom is from her lived experience, I guess. It's interesting how she also becomes, as a redhead, like a representative of the more melanated community. And I guess, yeah, I just want to do the right thing. So is the last racist thing to do to only allow my daughters to like Cinderella because she has blonde hair and blue eyes? What's your thought on that?
Well, listen, there's no way out of it. And I think the first step in doing the work is to realize that there's no way out of it and to just accept that. You're racist either way. And I've struggled with this ever since I had that conversation with, that was Kate Slater, the anti-racist educator. And because, you come away from that and it's like, there's not really an answer. She didn't really give an answer. So kind of where I've settled on this is I still let my daughter watch Moana, but I sit in the room while she's watching it and I glare at her disapprovingly the whole time. And so I let her watch it, but I make sure she feels bad while she's watching it. And that's the only way that I've found to thread this needle.
Right.
We're all trying our best
Yeah.
to decenter our whiteness. And I'm trying my best here.
I guess you could do the opposite too. Like you could either allow your child to watch Moana and say like, hey, don't like this too much. And if they ever like start singing along or getting enthusiastic, you could say, no, absolutely not, calm down. Or you could do like, okay, we're only going to allow them to watch Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty and glare at them then, like, oh, also don't get too excited about this because these are white princesses. I think the point is like you just always make your kids kind of like feel bad. I think that's probably the goal, the anti-racist goal.
Right. Well, your kids are white. So that's the goal in general, is you want to make sure that white people feel bad all the time. I mean, you could have, I suppose you could put on Cinderella or Little Mermaid or one of those and then afterwards ask or require that your child write a brief report outlining all the ways that this princess benefited from white privilege and colonial structures of oppression and that sort of thing. And so that's an approach you could take. I think maybe that's another way to navigate this.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, what the really important thing is that we should never feel good about ourselves, right? Our children should never feel good about themselves. We should always just be feeling bad, bad, bad all the time with nothing good in exchange, and just knowing that we are going to like receive the ire and resentment of the people that we are trying to, make it up to. And that's really beautiful.
It is a beautiful thing. I find it really encouraging. The idea that I should just feel awful all the time, I find to be quite an optimistic view of things, quite hopeful. And by the way, this is something that I was directly told in the film. In fact, I mean, this is basically a direct quote from one of the anti-racist experts that I talked to, a woman named Sarah Tacola, who previously was famous for a viral video a few years ago where she tried to kick some white kids out of a study hall that she had declared was only a study hall on campus only for people of color, and she was maintaining racial segregation on campus, and of course then she becomes a DEI expert from that experience. But one thing she said that I thought was really powerful is that it's important for white people to feel bad because of what their ancestors did. That's a direct quote. It's important for white people to feel bad. And it was the first time I'd heard someone say that directly.
Yeah.
And And I said, well, okay, I can do that.
Y'all, I love 7 Weeks Coffee. We love the taste of 7 Weeks Coffee in my home, but I just love what they stand for. At 7 weeks, the baby inside the womb is the size of a little coffee bean, and that's why they named their company 7 Weeks Coffee. They care about really high quality, great tasting coffee, but they also want to use the resources that they have to help save the lives of babies. And that's why they donate 10% of every sale to pregnancy resource centers. They've raised over $500,000 for pregnancy resource centers across the country, saving thousands of babies through the free sonograms and the different tools and resources that these centers provide for women who are in need. If you go to 7weekscoffee.com and use code Allie, you can save an additional 10%. And if you subscribe, you will get 15% off your order. And that's 25% discount right there. 7weekscoffee.com, code Allie. What else surprised you? I mean, of course, I'm surprised just in general how you had access to all of these people, but even knowing that you're, walking into a situation where you're going to be hearing a lot of nonsense, was there anything that truly just took you aback and you realized, wow, these people really believe this?
Okay. So we're switching out of sarcasm mode now?
Yeah. Well, you kind of transitioned us nicely with the answer to that question. So now we're in serious mode.
All right. Well, I ruined the transition. I totally botched it.
No, it's good.
I'll say what surprised me about it. I mean, I guess what I was most surprised by, I wasn't really surprised by the grifter types and the things that they said. It was kind of what I expected them to say, although still quite disturbing to sit in the room and hear it. It was the people who are not, the people that are getting sucked into this scam, into this cult. I was a little surprised by the fact that many of them, to me, seemed more genuine than I thought they'd be. It seems like they're true believers. I kind of figured that, if you do something like you're one of the white women at the table at a race to dinner session, or early in the film, we go to a workshop, almost like an AA style support group for white people who are struggling with their white privilege, sitting around in a circle. And, I guess going into this, I would have thought that if you're one of the white people that goes to something like that it must be like 95% virtue signaling, that you're doing it so that you can then tell your friends, oh, hey, I went, that race to dinner, I went to one of those. And from being in the room, I think it's more like 10% virtue signaling and 90% they believe it. And they really think that that they need to do this somehow to atone for their white sins. And I guess I was surprised by that. And also, it makes the whole thing more sad than I thought.
Yeah. You talk about self-flagellation in it. And of course, from like a humorous perspective, trying to define what that is. But do you think that is that 90% that they are trying to punish themselves? Or do you think they're truly hopeful that somehow they're going to be able to break out of this supposedly white supremacist system and, I don't know, do good for the marginalized communities?
I think it's a little bit of both, but I do think that there's a kind of a spiritual component to this, and I've thought a lot about it. And you can only go so far psychoanalyzing these people, but yeah. I do think that they, they walk around with guilt, and everybody has guilt. All people have guilt because we're fallen, we're a fallen race, and we commit sins, and you do things you're not supposed to do, and so you feel guilt about it. But of course, if you are a member of a, let's say, traditional religion, then you have some kind of framework for understanding your feelings of guilt, and you have something to do with it. There's something that you could take it somewhere and do something with it, and there's hope at the end of it. Hope at some point of being released of it, free of it at some point, whether in this life or the next. But if you don't have that religion, if you're a secular person, then I think you still have the guilt though, but you have no way of understanding it. You have no framework for understanding it. So I think that these kind of anti-racist grifters come along and they say, okay, well, you're feeling this way, and I'll tell you why you're feeling it. It's because you're white. And here's all the things you can do with this burden of guilt that you carry to be relieved of it. Then, of course, after they do it, they're given the bad news that, okay, well, good job for doing that, but you're still just as racist as you were before. So they stay stuck in this kind of guilt spiral that they can never be free of. And that's why I say for them, it's like there's it's authentic. I mean, I saw in all of these, in both environments that I mentioned, these people were breaking down in tears. They were crying. There might be an element of performance to that, but I don't think it's all performance. They really are like desperate to be free of this guilt that they've been told that they have. And yet there's no hope in the message ultimately. So it's pretty sad.
It really is like a desire for a religious experience, I think. And it's the ritualisticness, if I may, of religion, of course, without any of like the beauty and the grace of religion, because you're told to repent, but that you can't really repent. Of course, like repent means turn away from your sin, but you're being told that no matter where you turn, you should repent, but it's going to be like a 360-degree turn. Like you're going to be turning right back to your sin. You're never going to be free from it. Like Christianity says that Jesus's burden is light and his yoke is easy, but this is like, no, let me place this really heavy burden on you that you yourself aren't even guilty for, but like they use this vague terminology like your ancestors. And they're not even talking specifically about our ancestors because they have no way of knowing if like your ancestors or my ancestors really did own slaves. They're just talking about people who generally looked like us, who lived somewhere in proximity to us 200 years ago. We have to not only like bear the guilt of other people living today that kind of look like us, but we have to bear the guilt of people who lived centuries ago who kind of looked like us, even if they had no relation to us. That's like the exact opposite of the grace and the redemption and the repentance of Christianity and all of the legalism and like the most terrible aspects of false religion.
Yeah, I think you're right. And the other thing about Christianity is that there's a basic understanding that, it's not that some people are sinners; it's that all people are. And so the Christian message, the gospel message, and it's clear in the gospel, it applies to all people equally. Whereas this kind of, I guess what we might call the kind of DEI version of original sin, it only applies to certain groups. And that's one of the problems with this idea, as you know, like the idea that white people carry guilt for slavery, things their ancestors did. One of the many problems with that concept is that slavery, in fact, is a universal human sin. It was an institution across the entire world. Every group of people, every race participated in it for literally thousands of years. And I've always said that, I don't want to sidetrack us too much, but on that topic, I've always said that it's really unfortunate that we talk about slavery in this ridiculous, narrow way, where the only kind of slavery we're allowed to acknowledge is the kind that was perpetrated by white Westerners on Black people. It's unfortunate for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is that if we could get out of that, we could actually have, I think, an interesting, worthwhile conversation about the fact that everybody in the world did participate in slavery, or at least was, condoned it. Why is it that for thousands of years it like never even occurred to anyone on Earth, apparently, that slavery itself may be fundamentally immoral?
Right.
That's this massive blind spot that was shared by almost everyone for thousands of years. And we could talk about that. That'd be an interesting thing to really talk about. But we can't, because we're not allowed to acknowledge all that other stuff. We have to just we have to keep up this narrative that white people are the villains of history, and that precludes us from really learning any actual lessons from history.
Next sponsor for the day is Good Ranchers. Good Ranchers is a great way to vote with your dollar. You can help support American farms and ranches by getting all of your meat from Good Ranchers. All of the meat is all American. You are supporting this industry. You're also getting really high quality meat. They've got better than organic chicken. They've got craft beef. We absolutely love their steak and their chicken in our home. I love the ground beef, the Wagyu beef, because it is so versatile and easy to use. It makes life a lot easier. I don't have to worry about picking out meat at the grocery store. I know it's going to be high quality. I know exactly where it comes from. Plus, this is a company owned by a family. They're unapologetic about their values, about their faith in God. They've sat on this couch a couple of times to tell you their story. They're just awesome people, and it's a win all around. Get that box of meat to your front door every month. Make your life easier and healthier. Go to goodranchers.com and use code Allie. You'll get $25 off your first box when you do. Goodranchers.com, code Allie. I mean, it seems like it would be really liberating for everyone, white and black people, if we realize that if you go back far enough, your ancestors were probably both on the side of the oppressed at one point and on the side of the oppressor, probably on the side of the enslaved at one point and probably on the side of the enslaver. Like, no matter what your skin color is, we all have a shared history of conquer versus conquered. Like, everyone does. And if we all just kind of realize that and what you said about the general fallenness of man, we could get outside of this resentment-based conversation about who is more guilty for what, where we put all guilt for everything on white people and no guilt for anything on black or brown people. Because like you said, like, from that perspective and in that context, you can't have any conversation based on truth, based on reality, or based on morality. Because if someone is seeing the world through that lens, then everything becomes racism. Everything becomes a microaggression. And I just fail to see how we can even have a society based on that kind of premise.
Yeah, I think you said resentment, and resentment is the key, and that's what these the anti-racist leaders of America, this is what they want to foster, is resentment, suspicion. Yeah, I almost hate to use the word division because it's so overused, it's almost cliche, but in fact, that is actually what they're interested in, is dividing Americans. And what you find is that, I think, and we do this in the film, we go and talk to the anti-racist people, we talk to the kind of crazy liberal white women who fall into this stuff. We also talk to just normal people, and we go to a biker bar in the South, and they've got Confederate flags hanging on the walls and that sort of thing. And the kind of place where, if you listen to corporate media, you would expect if you listen to them to encounter just like vicious racism. And that's not what we found. In fact, what we found was people that said, "Hey, I'm not worried that much about race. I mean, I noticed if someone is black, but it does, I could still be friends with a black person. We all bleed the same," is what they said. And then we went immediately down to New Orleans, to the poor parts of New Orleans and the black community in New Orleans, and we heard almost exactly verbatim the same thing. We all bleed the same was the same line. So very similar from these two groups that, according to the media, would despise each other. So I think that what that tells us is that, at least in modern America, the default position for most people when it comes to race would be kind of, it wouldn't be a big deal to them. That would be the default position for most people who grow up in modern America, where you're around a lot of people of other races and ethnicities. It's just kind of like naturally that's how it is. And if you kind of leave people alone to their own devices on this topic, it's not a big deal. They don't make a big deal out of it.
Yeah, I saw Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was gonna say they don't want that. They're afraid of that default position, so they come in early. Especially, you want to get in when they're young, when they're kids, and tell them no. Like, you need to notice other races. It really means something. If you're a black person and you go to school with your white classmates, you need to be suspicious of them, and all that kind of stuff. They want to create that resentment and suspicion where it otherwise wouldn't be.
Yeah. And I mean, there's money to be made in those fissures, obviously, because they can say that there's this huge problem and only them, the ambassadors of anti racism, can fix it for tens of thousands of dollars. I did appreciate the couple people, both white and black, that pushed back on you. Of course, that guy that you sat down next to, and he said he immigrated here in like the 70s, and he just completely rebuffed any of your, satirical attempts to try to make him say, no, isn't America a racist country? And then also like the young white guy who basically told you to like shut up and was like, just like stop talking about racism. That was really encouraging, especially coming from a young person. And like you said, I feel like that's the attitude of most Americans. Like, can we please stop talking about this? Most of us really just care about personality and behavior. And beyond that, like we're being made to make an idol of people's skin color. And that's just not people's natural position or perspective.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we opened the movie talking about, we're talking in the 90s, growing up in the 90s, which was not a racial utopia. There's never going to be a racial utopia. We know that. And in the 90s, there was the OJ verdict. There were race riots. We know that. So it wasn't perfect, but I know I'm not the only one who grew up in the 90s and can think back to that. And I went to school it was a diverse community. And I don't remember sitting around at school, going to public school, 13 years, K through 12. I don't remember like sitting around talking about racism constantly. I'm sure the subject came up, but it wasn't anywhere near the kind of big deal that it is now. And which is interesting, because you would think, like, as time goes on and we get further and further away from slavery, Jim Crow, you would think that things should just kind of be naturally getting better. And it seems like they were for a while, but now we're going backwards, which is why you also have it not to bring it back to slavery, but, you start tearing down the Confederate monuments and Civil War monuments. It's fascinating that people today are, the wounds of the Civil War for people today who were born in like 2002, those wounds apparently are more fresh and more raw for them than it was for people who lived in like 1880.
Yeah.
We are less able now to talk about the Civil War in a rational, objective, emotionless way than they were literally 150 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, back when people who fought in the war were still living.
Yeah.
It's crazy, but it's all deliberate, of course.
Well, that's the kind of the conundrum that a lot of of these race baiters find themselves in. Like, on the one hand, they'll say all disparities between white and black people are due to Jim Crow and like perpetual discrimination and racism, but they can't explain why those gaps were smaller when we were actually closer to slavery and Jim Crow and all of those things. As we get further away from that, shouldn't those gaps be smaller if it's really due to systemic and like historical oppression? But of course, you're not allowed to look at other factors without being condemned as a racist, which again just means we can't have any honest conversations about anything, because we have to start with the premise that white bad, brown good. And yeah, that's a hard place to be stuck in.
Yeah, we can't talk about, of course, family, the state of the family, the state of the black family, 80% fatherless rate, especially in urban communities. We can't talk about those kinds of things. And I do think that when we talk about the fact that we seem to be going backwards, and I'm not the only person to notice that it seems like right around the time Obama was elected is when this backslide really started in earnest. And I think that again was quite deliberate. And one of the reasons is that, we were told about systemic racism, that the system itself is rigged against non-white people, so-called people of color, quote unquote. Well, if that's the case, then it would seem that the number one way to prove that the system is no longer rigged against black people is to have a black man who makes it all the way to the top of the system and is now running it, and didn't just, he didn't sneak in there, he was elected. So this would be the number one evidence that systemic racism is no longer an issue in America, is Barack Obama was elected, which of course it is, but the left looked at that and they said, well, we can't lose that. We can't, this idea of systemic racism is such a powerful, potent tool. We can't lose it. And so now that ironically, now that we have a black president, we have to redouble our efforts to convince people that America is systemically racist. And that's when, it wasn't long after that when we had BLM. It wasn't long after that when every police shooting of a black man, even if it was clearly justified, is now an example of racism. Then it wasn't long after that we had this rash, that's still ongoing rash of the most absurd hate crime hoaxes imaginable. So I think it's all part of that general effort.
Last sponsor for the day is Jase Medical. We are in an election season and it feels like we just never know what to expect. We don't know what is going to happen next. And we saw during COVID just the supply chain completely being upended. We saw shortages when it came to medications. We don't have to worry, or we don't want to have to worry about that when it comes to our family's health. And so make sure that you get a Jase case from Jase Medical. This is filled with common antibiotics, and you can add on things like an EpiPen or Tamiflu or these medications that you might need in an emergency situation but can't get to for whatever reason. You can also get a Jase Daily, which is a year-long supply of the prescriptions that you and your family rely on. Go to jase.com, use code Allie at checkout for a discount. That's jase.com, code Allie. One of those absurd stories that I know that you've commented on is a man in Maryland who he was going through the Chick-fil-A drive-thru, and his name was Marquise, and I guess he didn't speak clearly, at least to the person at Chick-fil-A who was taking his order, and the person thought he said monkeys, and so, which is unfortunate. That's an unfortunate mishearing, and so he put monkeys on the receipt. Of course, this man, whose name is Marquise, said that, oh, this was obviously racist. This person was obviously being bigoted towards me because of my skin color. It's amazing to me how people still believe that there is this kind of brazen, outright racism out there that would happen at a place like Chick-fil-A in Maryland, when we see like the repercussions that someone has to deal with, even for just doing something that is perceived wrongly as racist, like that someone really believes that someone would call him a monkey purposely at the Chick-fil-A drive-thru. But this ended up becoming like this viral story that made it on NBC. And we're supposed to believe that, yeah, this is just evidence of more systemic racism.
Right. We're supposed to believe that some kid working at a drive-thru at Chick-fil-A would just decide randomly to destroy his own life, not just get fired, but destroy his life probably permanently for the sake of calling a black guy a monkey. And by the way, this was a Chick-fil-A in Maryland, as you pointed out. I grew up in Maryland. It is a racially diverse place. So we could be pretty certain that this kid working the drive-thru, he had served many black customers. And did he call them all monkeys, or did he just randomly decide, well, this time I'm going to do it? No, it's of course it's ridiculous. And actually, I feel bad for the kid, of course. And also, you put yourself in his shoes for a second, because you can kind of imagine. We can't read his mind, but you kind of imagine what's going on in his mind, because he asked the guy his name. He doesn't understand. He thinks he hears monkeys, but in his mind, he can't ask that. He can't clarify. He can't say, "Oh, did you say monkeys?" He can't say that. And so he's probably thinking in his mind, what's a name that's close to monkeys that I could just put here? And he couldn't think of anything. Yeah. Because Marquise doesn't jump into your mind. And so he puts it down. And
I bet people say a lot of weird things. People probably come through the drive-thru and say a lot of weird things that their name is. Maybe they're joking. Maybe they're messing around with their friends. I think he probably just wrote down what he heard, just thinking, you know what, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I give fake names at the drive-thru all the time because I don't want people spitting in my food. So, who knows? People get fake names all the time. But of course, there's no benefit of the doubt anymore for anybody. There's no grace. There's no okay, hold on a second. I mean, let's just assume, before we've even investigated this, let's just assume that probably this kid is not some vicious racist who infiltrated Chick-fil-A. That would be the rational, I think, nice way of approaching it.
I also felt bad when I was watching your documentary and was reminded of that story of the little girls. They were at Disneyland or Disney World, and or they were at some festival, some fair, and a Muppet passed by these two young girls, and because they were Black little girls, the mother assumed that this big Muppet passed by them because of the color of their skin, and lawyers got involved, that's a lot. And of course, she talked to you. She talked to the news about this. This was a really big deal. And I just thought about that employee who probably gets paid nothing, and of course didn't do this on purpose. And I hope that her life wasn't ruined. But I mean, that's a lot to put on a person with absolutely no evidence. And yet that's the only kind of accusation that we can lodge towards someone without any proof, and not only not be punished for it, but actually be rewarded for it.
Yeah, well, and part of it is when you have the framework of systemic racism, when you have the idea that, which is what these anti-racist grifters teach, that all white people are inherently racist to begin with, then when things happen to you, when you have kind of unfortunate, annoying, unpleasant things that happen in your life, you automatically interpret it through that lens. Whereas those of us who don't have that, we don't have that framework because we don't listen to these people. Unfortunate, unpleasant things happen to us, and we understand it as just okay. Well, things like that happen in life, and this goes. I mean, Michelle Obama, we can remember when she was in the White House, complains a few incidences like this, but I remember one, I think, where she said that she had some horror story, I believe, if I remember correctly, where she was in line for ice cream or something, and a woman cut in front of her in line, and she, of course, thought, well, that it must be racism because I'm a Black woman. Meanwhile, all the rest of us, we've all had the experience of having someone cut in line. And yes, it's annoying. We don't like it. It can even be infuriating if you're already having a bad day and someone cuts in line. But there's no reason to see that in a racial context, unless that's just how your mind works and you see everything in a racial context.
Yeah, she said something, in that vein at the DNC in her speech. She said, Donald Trump can't stand to see two powerful, well-educated Black people become successful. And I'm like, oh, it definitely couldn't be because you're his political opponents. It's definitely because of that. That's always, it seems like, among those progressive activists, the default. All right, since we go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, if Kamala Harris was white, then Donald Trump he'd just drop out of the race and say, okay, you can be president. He would just if she was white, he would. We know famously, like when he's going against white opponents, he's very gentle, he's very nice, and he barely even campaigns. So
yeah, it's definitely just because of skin color for sure. Okay, I want to ask the question that I know everyone is wondering, and I know that you've been asked before, but as I'm watching this, as everyone is watching this, we're thinking, how in the world did you get access to these places? Like, how did you become the waiter at this race to dinner thing? Like, how did you bring cameras in there and get to play this role in these places, and these people don't even realize who you are or what you're doing?
Well, I can't give away all the secrets of the trade. Unless I knew I wanted to give up making these kind of movies entirely, and I wanted to retire from this particular business, which I don't. But I will say that there's no hidden cameras. I know I've seen that question online. Well, it's not hidden cameras. Everybody knows they're on camera, and they all signed releases to be filmed. So I can say that much. Why would they not be more skeptical? Why didn't they ask more questions? Why didn't they scrutinize a little bit more? To that, I really don't know. All I can say is that the answer that I have given is that part of it is that there's a certain arrogance that comes with being in this world, and you're very insulated from people who disagree with you, from alternative perspectives. Somebody like Robin DiAngelo, for example, I don't know her. I don't know what happens in her personal life, but I can imagine that she is not very often finding herself in rooms with people who don't agree with her already on everything.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like this false sense of security that comes with that. And so I think that many of them just couldn't imagine that. They just couldn't imagine it going this way. They couldn't imagine that I was going to do anything but agree with them and try to paint them in as positive a light as possible.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, we have to end on this. Speaking of white people, milk, raw milk. You went viral. I mean, you're going viral for a lot of different things. It seems like on a weekly basis, but this time it was because of your raw milk take, and people got really upset with you. Were you surprised? Because you said that raw milk, unpasteurized milk, is disgusting. People should not be consuming it. Were you surprised at the backlash you received because of that?
Yeah, surprised, amused as well. I don't care that much. You know, I've said one thing in my life on the subject of milk, and that was it. I've spoken out one time in my entire life. I've been in the media for like 10 years. I've said a lot of stuff. You know, I've got like thousands of hours of me saying stuff. And that was the one time I said anything about milk. And, you know, people seem to care a lot. It's also interesting that a lot of the backlash that I saw was like people saying, well, if people want to drink raw milk, they should be allowed to. How could you tell people they can't drink raw milk? I never said you can't drink. I never said it should be banned.
Yeah.
I don't think it should be banned. Go ahead and drink all the raw milk you want. Okay. I mean, if you want to drink cow feces, knock yourself out. I'm not going to stop you. No, I'm not going to come over to your house probably and have a bowl of cereal anytime soon. But if you want to drink it, go ahead and do it. I just happen to think it's pretty gross. And we can disagree on it. I do think it's interesting that for some people, the kind of milk they like is apparently like it's a central aspect of their political identity is milk. And I will say that part I didn't realize. I didn't realize that it was that important to people, the subject of milk.
Yeah, I didn't either. It's kind of like when you bring up like pit bulls or something like that, which I have been on the receiving end of a lot of pit bull hate. You know, pro pit bull haters get very upset about this. I also did not realize that things like that are part of someone's central identity and that they feel very threatened if you have a different opinion than them. But I thought that was humorous. Just wanted to give you yet another platform to defend your raw milk views. Matt, thank you so much. People can go to, they can go to a lot of places. They can go to project2025.com, right? Find out the truth about that. But they can also go to let's see, what's the website for Am I Racist? Is it just amIracist.com?
AmIRacist.com. Correct.
Okay, AmIRacist.com, and they can check that out. My makeup and artist and I were cracking up when we were watching this, and it's so good. Matt Walsh at his best. Thank you so much, Matt. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.